Okay, friends, time for our final leg of the World Leader Tour. And this time we'll do Leaders of Asian Persuasion. That's right, we're going to go through the current movers and shakers and deal makers and breakers of East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and we'll even throw in a couple of wild cards from the Pacific Rim. Here we go. As always, we'll do it in semi-quiz format so you can see some faces and try to figure out some stuff on your own before I lecture about them for hours and hours. Here we go. Which one of these folks is the real ruler of China? Is it this woman or this dude? Well, that seems obvious, maybe, if you know these leaders, but why would I frame the question like this? Because here are the peoples that you should know from East Asia, specifically from China or a place called China. The woman's name is President Tsai Ing-wen, President of the Republic of China. Okay, Republic of China, so that's the answer, right? Well, who's the other dude? That's Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, President of People's Republic of China. All right, so who's the winner here? I think you know who the winner is. You know Xi Jinping already from other parts of this class or just knowing about what's happening on planet Earth in general. Xi Jinping, President of People's Republic of China, that's actually the real China. President of the Republic of China, the ROC, that's Taiwan. So when you hear Republic of China or ROC, that's specifically Taiwan. People's Republic of China, that's the real China. China. And Xi Jinping is president of China, the big China, China proper, world power China, China super rich China. Yeah, that one. Now, the easy way to remember this is if you ever see People's Republic of China, just think that China has the most peoples in the world, so that must be the real China. People's Republic of China. And the leader is Xi Jinping. And before I talk about him for a long time, let me say just a few words about President Tsai Ing-wen. And her title is President of the Republic of China. She is an elected leader. So even though Taiwan is not necessarily a sovereign state, they do harbor kind of democratic principles, and they are what we call a democracy. They elect people. And Tsai Ing-wen is actually the first woman president of Taiwan, or Republic of China, if you like. Not only is she the first woman president, she is the first single woman president. That's interesting too, but that's kind of just trivia. What is it you need to know about her? Well, the main issues that we are looking at in the global context that are important about Tsai is that while she really wants to maintain decent, if not better, relations with China, which is a mere 100 miles away, and is a growing superpower, both militarily and economically. She wants to maintain good relations with them, but Taiwan, classically, and President Tsai specifically, does support strong and stable relationship with the United States of America. So we would consider this woman an ally of the United States. And so much an ally, in fact, that even though the status of Taiwan is under some dispute, some people in Taiwan believe that they're a sovereign state. Some other sovereign states on planet Earth recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. China, of course, does not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. So that's what's still in dispute between Taiwan and China. And here's why it's important that she has good relations with the United States. The United States supplies Taiwan with most of its military weaponry. Not for free, by the way. We sell it to them. But the U.S. also has said it's part of our duties to help make sure that Taiwan is strong, a issue which, of course, rankles China. It has for decades, still does in today's world. And this particularly became pointed when she won the election in 2016, that when Donald Trump became the president of the United States, he actually called her. It was one of the first kind of head-to-state calls that Donald Trump made. And President Donald Trump called President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan and congratulated her on her victory. Now, why am I saying it with this face? Because it really infuriated China. Xi Jinping was none too happy about this because this leads some sort of credence to that this is a real leader and that Taiwan perhaps is a sovereign state. Maybe Donald Trump didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. Who knows with that guy? But it's the first time a U.S. president actually called a president of Taiwan since 1979, I think. So the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is still strong. And the other thing to know about President Tsai is that she's from a party called the DPP. I'm not concerned that you know what DPP stands for. But the DPP is traditionally, its position on independence is that it's already kind of sovereign. And so this is a political party. Their political party stance is Taiwan already is kind of an independent state. And thus, any kind of formal declaration of independence is really completely unnecessary because everybody already knows that they already kind of are independent. Now, again, that's up for debate, and China does not recognize that, and most of planet Earth does not recognize that. And so President Tsai is in a tenuous position that she's of a political party who does believe, and they've been called a pro-independence political party in the past, so their party does believe that China maybe is independent, if not sovereign, but she can't say that out loud. She perhaps doesn't want to say that out loud because she wants to maintain good ties with China, an ever more powerful China, to which we'll now turn. The real China, the big China, is led by President Xi Jinping. Now, his title is also president, but he wasn't elected. Ain't no democracy there. How did he come into power then? The way that Communist Party politics work in China, which is you become kind of the head honcho of the Communist Party, and then you work your way up the corporate ladder of that political party until you get enough support and you become president by a committee that elects you, I suppose. But all these people are within the Communist Party. So Xi Jinping has many titles, the first of which is General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. So he's the head of the political party that's called the Communist Party. He is also the president of the People's Republic of China, the head honcho now in charge of the entire government. Another title that he has, simply because they haven't blended them together yet, is that she is the chairman of the Central Military Commission. We infer that in the United States with the U.S. president. The U.S. president is the head of the country and the head of the military. You don't have to specify. I guess we kind of do. We say he's the president of the United States and commander-in-chief. So Xi Jinping has those titles too. President of the People's Republic of China, also the chairman of Central Military Commission. He is the paramount leader, the leader of all leaders in China. And this is one interesting leader, by the way. He is special. I guess we could say every leader of China is special, being that China is the second biggest economy on planet Earth now, has the largest population on planet Earth, is the third or fourth largest country on planet Earth, and is rapidly becoming the paramount world power. Certainly competing with the United States already on the world stage as the most powerful country on planet Earth. So whoever's in charge of China is kind of important. But this Xi Jinping cat is even more important than most. We can now easily say that he is the most popular and the most powerful leader of China since Mao Zedong was in power, back when they became an independent state in 1949. So now the two biggest, most powerful leaders in Chinese modern history are Mao Zedong and this guy, Xi Jinping, and he's going to be around for a while. I'll get to that in a second. He just finished his first 5-year term. The way that the politics in China have worked since 1949 is that the party leader, the leader that becomes president, can do 2 5-year terms. And pretty much that's how it works. Since it's not a real democracy, they're just kind of nominated internally within this small Politburo. And as long as they don't screw up too bad in the first 5 years, they typically stick around for the second 5 years. China's all about long-term planning. They love the idea of stability. They want people in charge. They want a timely movement from one leader to the next, and they want it on schedule, and they're thinking in 5 and 10 and 20 and 50-year long-term plans that the government's going to do. So this is how it works. Now, Xi just last year finished his first 5-year term, and because he's so popular and powerful, obviously got his second 5-year term. What he did in his first 5-year term that makes him so powerful is that he enforced party discipline. So he really was kind of a rah-rah cheerleader to say, yes, the Communist Party is large and in charge, and we're going to weed out corruption, and we're going to weed out any weaklings who aren't supporting the party line, and we're going to have strict discipline and promote through propaganda how awesome the Communist Party is and how awesome China is within the country. He did that solid for 5 years. He did lead a campaign against corruption, which is a hot-button issue all across China and has been for decades. So the people like him. I mean, the Communist Party put him up there, but the people like that he's cleaning up China and enforcing rules. In doing so, though, he, of course, had to restrict civil society a little bit more. So he has been assuming more and more power, even from the limited numbers of people that have political power in China. So it's this bureaucracy. It's not a gigantic bureaucracy, but there's a bureaucracy of people in charge at the top tier of Chinese political power. And Xi Jinping for 5 years has actually been pulling power even from that group of folks. And he's been, again, kind of promoting countrywide, be a good Chinese citizen, do what you're told, follow the party line, make sure China's great again. So he's really pushed this idea of the Chinese dream, that, you know, there's an American dream, and now there's a Chinese dream, that China is back and we're powerful and we're popular and we're getting richer and everything's awesome as long as everybody keeps towing the company line. He's also pushed for a much stronger military, and he's the first Chinese leader in my lifetime that's pushed for a much stronger foreign role for China. So for most of the last 50 years or longer, China has been very focused on internal development, domestic development, into getting their own house in order, into getting richer, into promoting technology, into making people richer, raising people above the poverty line. China's done that and focused on it almost exclusively in the last 50 to 75 years. They've not really been a leader on the world stage in terms of, hey, we're going to go push for something at the United Nations. Hey, we're going to get involved in this international conflict. Hey, we're going to lead the way on economic or political or military decisions on planet Earth. They have not been doing that until now. So Xi Jinping has resoundingly said, China's back, we're powerful again, we're awesome, and we're comfortable enough at home that we're going to start exerting our power and our influence and our opinions out to other parts of the world. That's why he's such an important leader. This is the first time this has happened, again, for a very long time. Now, if we were to put him on the political spectrum, particularly of leaders of one-party states, because China is a one-party state, the Communist Party is the party. Do not ever repeat that China's a communist country. No, they're not. They have a political party who just has the name Communist Party, and who doesn't want to party in a communist party? So they have a political situation that they have one party in charge. It just so happens that the party's name is communist, but they do not have a communist economy. I'm not even sure they have a communist political system, whatever that means. Without the economy, I don't know. So it's a one-party state. And other popular one-party state leaders on planet Earth that you know of, Vladimir Putin, Recep Erdogan of Turkey, and now we have kind of the third big one-party state leader, that's China's Xi Jinping. And we would put Xi Jinping perhaps even further to the political right than we would Erdogan or Putin, because he is all about toe the company line, be good Chinese people, we're going to bring back conservative Chinese values. And no one else is getting political power, by the way. I have it all. And he's been increasing that political power to himself, not to the government, from the government to himself. So he has really heralded in a new era of Chinese power within the Communist Party Congress. The last big speech he gave was all about, it's time for change. It's time for China to take center stage on the world stage. He has really been openly tightening his grip on power, and this has now been taken one step further still. Just since, I want to say October, November, just since the end of last year, the Chinese government has been moving under Xi Jinping's guidance to change the constitution in order to get rid of the term limits on the president. That would have been him, and it is him. And since then, they actually have changed their constitution. So now Xi Jinping is no longer hampered with the idea he can only be in for one more term. Basically, they've thrown out term limits. This guy is so popular, so powerful, and has increased his power and reach within the government and within the military and in civil society that we can, I would say fairly accurately, suggest that Xi Jinping is the leader of China, perhaps until he's dead. It's certainly up to him when he wants to leave now, because, by the way, this constitutional change just got swept through, as is predictable in a one-party state. There's no one to argue. There's no one there to argue. It's just whatever the leaders come up with is what they do. No one within the government wants to cross him because he's so powerful. So even if there were legitimate voices who would think, oh, this isn't a good idea, they're not going to stick their head up and suggest they don't do it because he's very powerful, and bam, they would get knocked back down again. So this swept through, and now this guy, Xi Jinping, will likely be in charge for life. And they even wrote his name into the Constitution under Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. I will not hold you to know that. I just want you to know they put his name into the Constitution to be as important in Chinese modern history as Chairman Mao Zedong. Chairman Mao, you've already learned this, I hope, in the Chinese lecture, but if not, that Chairman Mao guy is the one who led the communist forces to victory in the long civil war that China had that spanned before and after World War II, was the guy who became victorious in China's civil war with the communists, and in 1949 declared that China has stood back up and is a singular unified nation for the first time in 100 years. So he really is kind of the George Washington of China. He was the first president and head honcho of China from 1949 to 1976. He was a controversial figure in China then and still now, because while he was a great freedom fighter and helped China stand up and unified the country and all that jazz, he wasn't that great as a political leader. So China didn't do that well in the first couple decades under his leadership. However, because of all the stuff he did before that, he is still revered as kind of the father figure of modern China. And his name is in the Constitution and now is joined by only one other Chinese leader's name, and that's Xi Jinping, a guy you should get to know well because he could be around forever. And I just love Mao and LMAO. I love that figure. Anyway, Papa Xi is large and in charge. There is a growing cult of personality around him, and he can now be in charge for life, something that perhaps doesn't even apply to the other one-party state leaders. Putin will have to change his constitution again to do it, so will Recep Erdogan, but Xi's now got it locked up. He can stay here forever. Now, other things I do want to reinforce that hopefully you already know about Xi Jinping is the other reason he's so powerful and very likely to maintain his leadership role on planet Earth, not just in China, is that in the modern era, and we're talking 2018, as U.S. President Donald Trump looks more and more inward within his country and adopts his America first, we're going to have tariffs and tax people from the outside. We don't want to be part of trade pacts. We don't want to do this, that, or the other. We're just going to focus on America. By the way, that's not a judgment call. I'm suggesting that's fact. Facts I don't think Donald Trump would dispute. But as Trump is doing that in the United States, Xi Jinping is actually expanding Chinese power out. So it's a really easy thing to remember what's going on between the world's leading premier world powers. And that is that the U.S. and China, the richest countries on planet Earth, kind of the most powerful countries on planet Earth. The U.S. is retracting from the world intentionally. China is very intentionally expanding out into the world. And the way that we know this, or one of the things I do want you to know, is that Xi Jinping is overseeing this initiative of China called China's One Belt, One Road policy. That is that they are expanding trade networks out. They're building roads and bridges and railroad networks and port facilities all across Asia and Africa. This is not just in China. This is an intentional expansion outward to build a global infrastructure network that has China at the center of it. So everything can, once more, as it did 500 to 1,000 years ago, goods and services will be able to flow easily out of China to all points in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and perhaps Europe. And, roads and railroads and port and ships go both ways, so stuff can go back into China. But China is the one pushing this One Belt, One Road. Some might refer to it as the Silk Road Initiative. They are doing a lot. They are being very global at a time that the United States is retracting from its typical role as a global leader. And again, this gets back to Xi Jinping's philosophy that it's time for China to take center stage in how the future world is shaped. And I did come up with this meme all by myself. I do love it. And that's what she said. And while we can applaud or be envious or just kind of respect and like Xi's economic initiatives, we do want to tamper that honor, respect with the true knowledge that in order to pull this off, this is a one-party state, and they are fairly repressive, or can be fairly repressive, to their own citizens to keep everybody in line. I will end Xi Jinping's rant with this. What cartoon character is banned from use in any publications in China? It is a cartoon character, and it's an American cartoon character. Do you know the answer? Because it's been in the news for the last year or two or three, and that is Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh and all of Winnie the Pooh's friends from the 100-Acre Wood are not really allowed to be used in Chinese media. Now, why would that be? Because some folks, and here's some pictures, pointed out that Winnie the Pooh kind of does have some similarities to Xi Jinping himself. And I love this one with Obama and Xi Jinping as Pooh and Tigger. Or even the more funny one is Eeyore and Pooh with Shinzo Abe and Xi Jinping. So that's not good. All right, that's disrespectful to great leaders. So we can't do that anymore. And that's what you get for double-digit economic growth and, you know, a singular a government that it's streamlined, it can do whatever it wants. That comes at the cost of any civil dissent. So everything, we can look at that and be envious and say, wow, their system really works, and look at all the stuff they're doing. Yeah, but their people really aren't terribly free. And maybe that's fine with them. I'm just suggesting that's the trade-offs that you have for economic growth, especially at the rates that China has seen. And the idea that you're one nation and everyone's united. Yeah, that's because there's a lot of things that people don't see, and they don't have a lot of voice to argue back when they see things that they don't like. But anyway, I've spent too much time on Xi, but Xi's not the only Asian for consideration here in our long lecture. Let's do a rapid-fire round of Asian persuasion leaders. I'll give you the leader, you tell me who it is. And there's the easy one to start. Who's that guy? That's Xi Jinping. We just talked about him, president of China. Who's that guy? Well, maybe you know him already from world news. That's Shinzo Abe. That's the prime minister of Japan. How about this guy? None of you know this guy. I don't even barely know this guy. That's Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, president of Pakistan. And guess what? Don't write him down. I'm not even going to have you know him or memorize him for a quiz. No respect to Prime Minister Abbasi, but I'll get to why we're not sure how long he's going to be in office soon. But how about this guy? Everybody knows this guy. Laughing boy, he's hilarious. That's, of course, Kim Jong Un. Dear leader of North Korea, a.k.a. Fatty the Third is what the Chinese citizens call him, a.k.a. Rocket Man is what Donald Trump calls him. And finally, who is this Asian leader of note? That would be Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. Now, why would I pick on these five guys? Well, these are the five guys that we're going to cover mostly in the rest of this lecture, but also I do want you to understand the weight that these Asian leaders hold on the world stage. Namely, this is just five dudes. Five dudes. Sorry, there ain't no ladies. Five dudes. Okay, it's five dudes. Four of them are nuclear powers if you go ahead and accept that Kim Jong-un's North Korea is likely a nuclear power, which I do. So four of these five possess nuclear weapons. Also within these five are the biggest standing army on planet Earth, that's China, and the number 4 biggest standing army on Earth, that's North Korea. I didn't even get economics in here, but it's a hefty chunk of change for the economies that these guys collectively are in charge of as well. And people-wise, these five, just these five, are in charge of 3 billion plus human beings. That's almost half of Earth's population is led by just a handful of dudes. So it's probably not a bad idea to know who these dudes are if you want to understand world politics or even just modern history at all. Now, we'll get to the other 3 in order, but we'll stick close by in the Chinese neighborhood and go to Kim Jong Un in North Korea. And before we get to Fatty the Third himself, we'll revisit the Kim family tree, or is it a bush? It's hard to tell. What do I mean by the Kim family tree? Well, ever since North Korea became independent, I should say Korea, the peninsula, was liberated from the Japanese after World War II. Remember, if you know anything about World War II history, the Japanese actually colonized and made the entire Korean peninsula into a slave work camp from 1895 up to 1945, when they were defeated in World War II and kicked out of the Korean peninsula. So then logically, oh, there's going to be a Korean state again. Well, no, then a civil war broke out on the Korean peninsula, which is why in today's world we have a North Korea and a South Korea. It's all Korean people, but there's two kind of different states. Now, North Korea has, since its inception, since World War II, been led by the Kim family. The Kims. It's not their first name, it's their last name. And there's only been 3 Kims in charge, so it's kind of like a monarchy, except they kind of have been communist slash Marxist slash insane, and we're not really sure what to call them. It's not really one-party state. It's not necessarily democracy. It's kind of like a hereditary dictatorship, I guess. And so the 3 Kims on the family bush are Kim Il-sung. He was great leader from 1948 until 1994. So Kim Il-sung is kind of seen as the father of North Korea. He was in charge at the inception. He led North Korea into the Korean War under Soviet tutelage, and was the first great leader who was in charge for a very good long time and saw North Korea rise up and industrialize and do a few other things. So he is looked upon, again, like I said, Mao Zedong is kind of the George Washington of China. Kim Il-sung is kind of the George Washington of North Korea, although it's really hard to use those 2 names in the same sentence. Whew! Anyway, once Kim Il-sung, great leader, died, his son, Kim Jong-il, took over. And he was a great leader from 1994 till 2011. He was not seen nearly in as good a light as Papa Kim, and he only was in charge for, less than a couple decades. He was really kind of a cuckoo wacko himself, but the whole North Korean peninsula is basically a big propagandized society. Everybody is trained from birth to believe that the Kim family are gods, and they are in charge of everything, and they should just be worshipped. So even though most people back in the day would have said, well, Kim Il-sung, he was actually a decent leader, stuff happened. Kim Jong-il, not so much, but everybody has to keep saying, but he's great and a god, and we love him. And so he was great leader from 1994 to 2011. And then comes his son, Kim Jong Un, the current great leader of North Korea, but I actually call him the great eater of North Korea. Mostly because he pretty probably weighs more than any 3 average Korean bodies put together. And he's been in charge from 2011 to present, to infinity, or until the buffet ends, whichever comes first. Now, the thing you need to know about Kim Jong-un came from relative obscurity. Nobody really knew who this dude was when he took over. No one knew any history of him when he took over in 2011. He kind of came out of nowhere. But again, it's not a democracy. It's a hereditary dictatorship. So he just took over when his papa died. And he's been large and in charge ever since. And when I saw this dude initially, because no one had ever even seen a picture of this guy till he was basically being inducted in as the leader in 2011. And I looked at this guy, and I'm like, dude, I know we've never seen pictures of him, but boy, he looks familiar. He sure looks familiar to me. And then it finally occurred to me, oh, that's right, he's that kid from Up. So he did have a short career at Pixar before he became the leader of North Korea. Now, what else is important to know about Kim Jong-un? And you probably have seen a lot of him in the news, especially since Donald Trump took office, and there's been a war of words between them and possibly ramping up for a nuclear war between the United States and North Korea. North Korea is always considered the United States as the true mortal enemy of the North Korean people for reasons that are too long to go into here. They don't like Japan very much either for all of that pre-World War II history between Korea and Japan. But what's important to note about Rocket Man, or Rocket Boy, what did he call him? Rocket Man? Trump called him Rocket Man. is that there's been a ramping up of rhetoric between the two because Donald Trump and his administration, just like the Obama administration before him, have seen a rapid buildup of armament since Kim Jong Un took over. Now, the North Koreans have never much liked the Americans, and perhaps vice versa. And the world has been worried for decades that the North Koreans are building up their weaponry and their capacity to have a nuclear weapon. Although they're an isolated state, they trade with no one, they interact with no one, no UN inspectors go in or out, so no one knows what's going on. That's why it's called the Hermit Kingdom, And so, back to the thing that's different about Kim Jong Un than his predecessors is, there's long been a fear that North Korea is building up a nuclear capacity. Kim Jong Un has really taken it over the top since 2011. And here's a nice graphic that really displays everything you need to know, or at least that I want you to know right this second, which is Kim Il-sung, in charge for decades, did certain missile tests, mostly rocketry tests, and some underground, perhaps atomic testing. And you can see the little bars are each test, how many tests they did per year. And then when Kim Jong-il got into power, he did some testing as well, a little more ramping up in the 2000s, 2006, 2009. And mostly Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung used weapons testing as a bargaining chip to say, hey, we'll stop testing weapons if you give us more aid, or we'll stop testing weapons if you give us that, or trade more with us, or we'll stop testing weapons if the United States withdraws from South Korea. Things of that nature. It was more of a bargaining chip, mostly to get stuff, or at least to be considered as a power worthy of recognition and respect. Now look at Kim Jong-un, who's only been in power since 2011. So in 7 short years, every single year, the Un administration has been testing not just more than their predecessors, but way more than their predecessors. Been doing rocket launches, and specific rocket launches that go across the Sea of Japan and even go across Japanese airspace. And you know, if you paid attention to any current events in the last couple of years, they're saying they can now get a rocket to San Francisco or to Alaska. That is, they could strike the United States. And couple that with what also this chart is showing is testing of atomic and perhaps nuclear devices. Those have been underground, so no one really knows. So now we have a leader who is not just using it as a bargaining chip. It, to me, is apparent that he is pushing forward to nuclear armament, and possibly they have it already. It makes sense from their perspective that because they're so poor and so desperate and so isolated, the only way they can get respect is to become a nuclear power and therefore get a seat at the big boy table of other nuclear powers. Again, this is an opinion / a projection. I don't know that they have a nuclear weapon. Nobody does. But increasingly, given their success of tests in the last 5 to 6 years, it seems more and more likely. And the fact that they're starting to open up and be a lot nicer to countries around the world, including China and South Korea, that also suggests that they now have a heavier bargaining chip in their pocket. And my prediction is that they are a nuclear power and they're waiting for the right time to pull that card out onto the table. However, we'll get to what has been changing here lately. And before we get to that, let's talk about other Korean leaders, because the Shoney's big boy in charge of North Korea is not the only leader in the Korean Peninsula. I do want you to know the other Korean leader, that is South Korean President Moon Jae-in, President Moon. Now, what to know about this guy is he is center-left. Okay, so on the liberal side of the political spectrum, South Korea is a democracy. They do elect leaders. He actually just took over in an abnormal situation in that the previous president was actually impeached and physically thrown out of office in 2017. So President Moon hasn't even been in office a year yet. He's a brand new leader, but he did win by a fairly significant margin. He, as all South Korean presidents are, he is a U.S. ally. South Korea and the United States have been tied together politically and militarily ever since World War II and the Korean War, where the United States led a UN group in to save South Korea from invasion by the North. That's the whole Korean War thing, if you don't know what that was about. And so South Korea, I won't say is fully dependent on the United States militarily. However, There are upwards of 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. South Korea definitely falls under the U.S. protection umbrella. If it were ever attacked by North Korea or China, the United States, almost with no reservations, would retaliate on behalf of South Korea. So there's been a tight relationship, and he, like his predecessors, is a U.S. ally. However, do jot this down in your brain, he has been when he campaigned, he's been much more about trying to resolve the dispute on the Korean Peninsula diplomatically, and has said that they should talk more, and that that the United States and North Korea need to stop all the war rhetoric and calm down, and let's get to the negotiating table, and we want to talk with North Korea, and we want to proceed. So all of the previous South Korean leaders have kind of said that, but this guy's been making more concrete moves. So he's a U.S. ally, so he has to listen to what Donald Trump says, or at least hear it, not listen to it. But he wants a peaceful resolution, and he has been very open about being unsure about the U.S. military policy of this ramped up rhetoric. He has been unsure of all the U.S. missiles that have been put into South Korea, and these missiles, mostly defense missiles and perhaps interceptor missiles, have been increasingly put by the United States into South Korea for the last couple years. A lot of South Korean people don't like it. I know that seems hard to believe. You're like, whoa, why wouldn't they want U.S. to protect them from cuckoo crazy North Korea? A lot of South Korean people say this is just an enticement to war. The more the U.S. puts weapons here and the more that Donald Trump talks, the more likely we are that we're going to war. And who's going to suffer in this war? We are. We're the ones who are all going to die. So there's a decent, if not a majority, or maybe close to a majority of South Koreans who don't view favorably a big U.S. military presence in South Korea. And President Moon himself has had to walk a tightrope and suggest, I'm not so sure we want all of these new missiles coming in to South Korea right this second. He wants to beef up South Korean military itself. He wants to beef up South Korean military, the homegrown military, but he is absolutely dedicated to saying we are not pursuing nuclear weapons, and we don't want nuclear weapons. Even if somebody were to give them to us, we don't want them. Now, that's his policy. He's an elected leader. Someone might change their mind who takes over after him, but that's the policy as it stands right now. So I forgot to put him on the spectrum, but if you put Kim Jong Un on the spectrum, it would be way extreme right, full-on weirdo dictatorship, whereas South Korean President Moon would be just center-left. And again, this has been a lot in the news since Donald Trump took office, and South Korea has consistently said, we don't want all this rhetoric. We will not develop or possess nuclear weapons. Please, Mr. Trump, please stop stirring the pot on this. And Donald Trump actually has went to South Korea on his Asian tour, and they got along decently. But it's still all up in the air of what's going to happen on the Korean Peninsula. It is the biggest issue for all of East Asia, and quite frankly, maybe the entire world, which is why I'm spending a little extra time talking about these leaders to you. You got to know what these leaders are all about to get a sense of who might do what. And between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean dear leader Kim Jong Un, it's super hard to predict because these are, by their very own definitions, unpredictable human beings. That's why a lot of us are a bit more worried about what's going on there. And as if it hasn't been crazy enough in the last couple years, more crazy stuff is afoot here in 2018. This is kind of brand new news. On March 27th of 2018, that's depending on when you're watching it, not that long ago, Kim Jong Un went to China on a surprise secret visit. No one knew about it. No one knew about it till it was already over. And he met with the president of China, I forget what's his name, Xi Jinping. And this secret visit is the first time that Kim Jong Un has left his country since he took office in 2011. It's his first time out of the Hermit Kingdom, and he went on this secret train to go hang out with the Chinese president and talk politics and maybe economics, but certainly military stuff. And so this unannounced visit to Beijing, and this is before a planned summit between American and South Korean and Chinese and North Korean leaders, which is supposed to be due soon. And Donald Trump said this year that he was going to visit with Kim Jong Un. So that also happened in 2018. I forgot. That's the start of this. So Donald Trump said, I'm going to visit Kim Jong Un. He was invited, and they said, sure, we're going to get together. Everybody's like, whoa, okay. That's crazy. That's never happened. A U.S. sitting president has never sat down with any North Korean leader. So, whoa, that's the crazy first thing in 2018. This is the second crazy thing. Here in March, they said, okay, well, then this guy, Kim Jong Un, went and visited with Chinese leaders. And he, at this meeting, suggested, well, we should economically work together more. And we are not opposed to denuclearization. Wait, what? Wait, what? From the guy who, for 7 years straight, has been ramping up their rocketry and nuclear programs, met with the Chinese, said we're not against that, as long as the United States lowers its rhetoric and possibly pulls out troops. We don't know what else the North Koreans might want in exchange for this, but it's a savvy move. I've been making fun of Kim Jong Un, well, for 7 years. It's his rotundness, his haircut, I don't know, his brutal, ruthless dictatorship in which millions of people are starving to death, you know, hilarious things like that, which make him an easy target to make fun of and ridicule. But he apparently is not as foolish or goofy or demented as he appears, because this is a pretty savvy move. Again, I'm suggesting perhaps they already have nuclear capability, and now suddenly he's wanting to open up and make friends with other powerful world leaders, just before he meets with a powerful United States leader. It's like, whoa, things are afoot. And on top of that, just last week, Kim Jong Un visited a performance by South Korean pop stars in Pyongyang and applauded and said it was great, and went backstage and met him and had selfies and stuff, saying this is great. And by the way, the North Koreans also sent envoys and a joint hockey team to the Olympics this year that were held in South Korea. So there all sorts of things are happening which are completely unprecedented, to be completely honest. And we don't know where this is going, but things are starting to happen fast. Kim Jong Un has also agreed to meet South Korean President Moon on a summit on the 27th of April. That's coming up in a few weeks. So it's hard for me to underline the importance of how quickly things are changing here and the radical personalities that are involved. President Moon is the most stable of all of them, and I am talking about President Trump as well. So things are evolving fast, and I will go ahead and throw out a couple possible, some predictions that are possibilities. We could see that Kim Jong Un is playing a fantastic game of poker and is bluffing everybody to buy themselves more time and develop more weapons and be as cuckoo crazy as they've always appeared to be. That's one possibility. It could be that he is magnificently pulling off a good hand in this poker game, and that he already has nuclear weapons, and now he can negotiate with the big boys, and he is now becoming more diplomatic because he considers himself at the big boy table already. I mean, meeting with the president of China and the president of South Korea, and the president of the United States. None of his predecessors have ever done this. So he could be getting ready to meet with all these people and say, by the way, we are a nuclear power, so what are the chips on the table now? How do we proceed? Maybe he wants the world to recognize North Korea as a nuclear power and a big boy. Maybe he's bluffing. I kind of think it's doubtful. Maybe he's doing all of this to offset U.S. President Donald Trump. Again, why would I suggest that? Well, he is suddenly being more diplomatic than Donald Trump. He is meeting with world leaders and cozying up to them before. And maybe has already set a game plan with these leaders before he meets with the United States. So he's playing a very savvy game here that I won't say is isolating U.S. President Trump, but is certainly strengthening the hand of North Korea and personally Kim Jong Un himself. But I know I've already spoken way too long about that. Let me get to some other Asian leaders in the hood, and who else in the hood is keenly fascinated with the developments in North Korea and about a possible Korean War and a possible nuclear war that might involve anybody in this neighborhood. Well, that would be the Godzilla in the neighborhood, and that would be Japan. And we're now talking about Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe is no stranger to prime minister positions. He used to be the Prime Minister of Japan about a decade ago, or maybe less. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is center-right, so politically just center-right. Conservative, actually a little further right than just center-right. He'd probably be about where Donald Trump is on the right-hand column. This is his second round as Prime Minister. As I suggested, he actually quit the first time he was Prime Minister because there was political gridlock and he had other things going on. He said, nah, nothing's working. I'm out. Go hold another election. If you didn't know this already, Japan is a huge U.S. ally. And jot this down in your brain, Shinzo Abe personally is a huge fan of U.S. President Donald Trump. Remember, Japan is the third biggest economy on planet Earth. The U.S. is number 1, China number 2, Japan number 3. And not only is Japan still number 3, it will stay in the top 10 for some time to come, even though it will probably go down the ranks eventually. But it's still a big power. Economically, not so much politically, and militarily, things are changing. Hold on to that thought for a second. He is a super nationalist. Uber nationalist. Do you think Donald Trump's all about making America first? Shinzo Abe is all about making Japan great again. And I'm not saying that off the cuff. He truly wants to kind of revisit Japan's former glory, and this does worry a few people in the neighborhood, namely the Koreas and China. Now, I said he's pretty conservative. He's an uber nationalist. He is pushing for constitutional change to increase power. Now, not power to himself. That's what President Xi Jinping of China did. He changed the constitution to get himself more power. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan is pushing for constitutional change to increase power to the Japanese state, and specifically to the Japanese military. Yes, that's right. Japan's military, Japan's constitution dictates that Japan cannot have a military. They can only have a self-defense force, right? Yeah. And that's because of all their atrocities during World War II and previously, that they said, no, we never want to do that again. We do not want to have an active military force that can go attack anybody. We will never, ever be able to attack anybody. We won't give ourselves the right to attack anybody. We can only defend the islands, nothing more. Shinzo Abe and his center-right political party have been pushing against that for years, and they have been gaining popularity with that front and gaining in political will to do it. So the Constitution has started to be modified. And by the way, I would say the majority of Japanese people do not want that Constitution changed. They do not want to have a proactive military. But the minority of people that support that change to the Constitution have been growing. So just as politics worldwide have been getting more conservative and more towards the right side of the spectrum, the same has been happening in Japan. So say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe only 5%, maybe 10% of people would have supported Japan changing its constitution in order to have a proactive military. That number may be up to 20 or 30 or 40 now for all I know. It's not a very small voice. It's been an increasing voice. Now, again, I don't care about the exact numbers, but I want you to remember that Japan's population in general has been getting more conservative. There have been more far-right political parties that have risen up or been started or been created. And more people are moving towards the conservative right when they vote, and more people are perhaps now supporting this constitutional change. Now, why? Well, because of cuckoo crazy North Korea, who's been testing more weapons, especially missiles, some of which they've shot over Japanese airspace. So you're starting to get the picture. It's not a surprise that Japan would have voted in a more ardent nationalist, a rah-rah Japan. Let's get powerful again. Let's make a powerful military again. And let's get rid of this clause in our Constitution which limits us. Now, they already changed it to say that the Japanese the self-defense force can, in times of need, go abroad to support Japanese allies. That has already been put into the Constitution. And it doesn't say anything about fighting, but it says, well, if the United States goes to war somewhere, the U.S. is one of our strong allies, of course we should go support them with, I don't know, rescue missions or supply lines and things of that nature. That was not the case in the past. They've already changed the Constitution to allow for that, and many see that as the crack in the door that's going to allow a lot more change, including scrapping Article 9 of their Constitution altogether and having a completely active military. By the way, the United States would very much like that. Donald Trump personally probably very much likes that, although I don't know that he even knows about it. So the Constitution has already started to be modified. The popularity to change that is been growing. And Shinzo Abe is particularly interesting because his father before him was prime minister, and his father, and this is decades ago, his very pro-nationalist father not only wanted to change the Constitution to allow for an active military, he, on many occasions, said, Japan needs to stop apologizing. Japan needs to stop apologizing for war atrocities. It's over. Countries go to war. Crap happens. It's history. It's over. We need to stop apologizing. Now, that's Shinzo Abe's father. But like father, like son. And the apple usually doesn't fall far from the tree, as the old saying goes. So, yeah, he hasn't said it out loud yet, but most of the things he's done on a personal character basis suggest that, yes, he is also over the era of Japan apologizing, and his moves to change the Constitution cement that, yeah, it's time for Japan to become more powerful again, which, of course, infuriates and worries China and the Koreas and maybe some other countries in the Pacific Rim. I would also note that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, I said, is a big fan of Donald Trump's. That's true. Donald Trump, one of his first visits, the first visit on his Asian tour, he hung out with Shinzo Abe, and I think Shinzo Abe is one of the first people he called when he got into office as well. And they went to Japan on his first stop in Japan and played golf with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Big golf fans, both of these guys. Why is that important? Well, because they share a whole lot of traits in terms of being rah-rah, our country first, and big powerful economies, and decent-sized militaries. And if you like people, then you tend to agree with them, and so he probably supports Donald Trump's, political foreign moves, and Donald Trump would probably support him changing the Japanese Constitution. That's why it's important to know people's characters, right? Okay. So, yeah, I would say that of all the world leaders, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is probably the biggest fanboy of Donald Trump. I could be mistaken. I'm trying to rack my brain for somebody who would support him more, but so far, Shinzo's been the one that's out there going, he's great. We love him, man. We love golf. So they got a bromance going on.